Alright my darlings, me here again, and well, I've just seen the last episode of this series of Doctor Who, and much like last year, I'm here to bring you my thoughts on all the episodes that I've seen thus far, with the exception of the first episode of course, because I already did that. However, before we get into the individual episodes, there are a few aesthetic and miscellaneous things that I want to get into first. Firstly, there's the thing that comes with every new Doctor and writer, and that is the new designs of the sonic screwdriver and the TARDIS interior. As for the sonic screwdriver, I quite like it. It's definitely a lot more minimalist, simplistic and sleek compared to previous models, and it's unique in that its light is yellow, which is a colour we haven't had for the bulb on the sonic screwdriver as of yet. But it doesn't quite stand out as much compared to the other ones. Because of its minimalist design, there's not that much about it that makes it so unique, apart from it being very minimalist. But then again, at the same time, it does also look like a slightly more modernised version of the original sonic screwdriver that Troughton used, which, if I'm honest, I kind of prefer the Troughton one because it was so simple. But yeah, it's an okay look, and it is something that I'll probably grow to enjoy a lot more, just not something that really sort of grabs me. Though it is kind of cool that the Doctor actually handmade this one, which is something that I think is actually rather original for all the sonic screwdrivers, because previously the Doctor had said that he had either bought them or the TARDIS had made them, so the fact that the Doctor made her own this time is actually pretty cool. As for the TARDIS, the exterior is basically the same, nothing much to add there, apart from the fact that I do miss the ambulance of St. John that they used to have on the outside, that little emblem that the Matt Smith era had. I do really miss that, but besides that, it's nothing much to talk about with the exterior. As for the interior, it looks like a more modernised version of the design that was in the Tennant and Eccleston era, where it was very grungy and it had the sort of coral reef design to it, which kind of hints to the idea that the TARDIS has grown out of coral, which is part of a really deep part of Doctor Who lore. And it looks a lot more bleak and sort of atmospheric, and I'll be honest, I don't really like my TARDISes to look like that. I like them looking very bright and colourful and sort of like this, have this air of mystery about them, but a very intriguing, fun sort of mystery, like the original TARDISes from the old era, or Matt Smith's TARDIS, his first interior. I really like that one. So, not great, but that's more personal preference. In terms of its design, it is very well designed, and I do love the little miniature TARDIS on the console, and the custard cream dispenser. That's a good touch. As for the cinematography, I kind of went over this in my last Doctor Who vlog, but I've noted how it is very, very cinematic and a little bit overwrought in terms of its visual style, but it does look very impressive, and it really shows off the amount of budget that this series has in comparison to the last ones. And it also looks like they're trying to emulate the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies a little bit. Jury's still out on whether that's a good or a bad thing, and I admit I'm not a Star Trek fan, I haven't watched any of those movies, but I know the kind of look that they go for, and you can definitely see elements of it in the new Doctor Who. And to be honest, a lot of what makes Doctor Who so enjoyable is its very simplest and rustic charm. To have it really over-dramatic like this in the visuals, it really creates a bit of an odd contrast, and it doesn't really mix all that well. But again, just terms of it in sort of like objective aesthetics, it does look good, it's just not quite what I think of when I think of Doctor Who. And now to move on from visuals, it seems only fitting to talk about music, and this is actually the first time we've had a different composer since Murray Gold, who did all the music for Doctor Who since it was rebooted back in 2005. Now it's a guy called, and I apologise, I'm sure I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but Segun Akinola? I apologise if I got that wrong, which I probably did, but that's the only way I can pronounce it. His music's a little bit more, I guess the word would be commercial. It sounds more like the kind of thing that you would hear in a typical sci-fi TV show or movie, which again does give it that sense of it being a lot more cinematic and a lot more theatrical. But again, Murray Gold's music was absolutely stellar. It's hard to think of any tracks that he did that were actually bad or just not very good for Doctor Who. They were all fantastic, and they had that sense of whimsy, fantastical sort of fantasy. It was just a lot of fun to listen to his music, and it was really catchy, and you could just, it really hit you the moment you first heard it. This one does feel a lot more generic. Maybe I may be able to get into it more as the series progresses, but yeah, for now, not quite a big fan, but it's still good music. It's just not quite as good as Murray Gold's. And one last thing to say before moving on to the full episode recap is with the characters. I'm really enjoying Whittaker's Doctor. I'm not sure if I would regard her as one of my all-time favourites, and I do have something to say about her, not her performance, but the way she's written later on when it comes to a particular episode, but yeah, I'm really enjoying her so far. Mandip Gill as Yasmin, she's good, her performances are really great, but I feel like we don't know quite enough about her character. That was one of the biggest problems, is that they don't really go much into who she actually is as a person, but as a character she's enjoyable. Toyson Cole as Ryan has also grown more in my mind as the series has gone on. As he started, he was a little bit generic, but as the series has gone on, he's really proven how much of a fun character he can be, and also the depths of emotion that he can convey through the character, which plays a lot more into Graham, of course, played by Bradley Walsh, who, again, I'll get into a little bit more later on, but he has become my favourite part of the series. I really enjoy his performance, with the exception of some bits in the final episode, which again I'll get into later. But that's it for aesthetics, and now let's move on to the actual episodes, and, well, while watching this series, me and my nanny, who is a long-time Doctor Who fan, we were making our own observations, and we both agreed that we feel like the series started out on a high note with the first episode, and then slowly started to go downhill, and then by the middle it started going back up again. And granted, I don't know her opinions on this episode, but mine is that the last one kind of made it go down a bit more. But I'll get into more in details when I actually get into the individual episodes. And also, I've noticed that Chibnall is taking a particular trend to try and ignore past continuity, which is not a bad thing. If he wants it to be more of his own separate thing, then that works. But sometimes a little reference here and there doesn't hurt. And he does do that, but they do kind of come in at unexpected moments, and they do kind of stand out a little bit more. But yeah, I think that sticking entirely to his own sense of continuity, it might have hurt it a little bit, because, I don't know, I mean, sometimes when an old villain comes back or an old character, it doesn't always work, but it does have that sense of familiarity to it that keeps you coming back, so I don't know, personal preference once again, but for me, wasn't quite the biggest fan of that. So first, there was the Ghost Monument, and I quite liked that episode. It definitely had that classic Doctor Who feel of mystery and intrigue and going on an adventure. It definitely felt like a good episode to sort of open up the series after the first episode. And it did feel a little bare bones at times, and there was a plot point brought up in the middle of the episode that has not yet been resolved. I'm going to avoid spoilers as much as I can in this video, but those who have watched the episode know what I'm talking about. And that might get resolved in the New Year's special. Why it's New Year's, I'm not sure, apart from Christmas. But yeah, so apart from that, I did enjoy the episode. Bit simple, but enjoyable. Then there was the episode Rosa, and oh boy, do I have a lot to say about this one. I'll try and keep this one short, but to sum up, it's basically a very, very good episode of something that really isn't Doctor Who. It basically feels more like a biopic about Rosa Parks that just happens to have the Doctor Who gang in it. And I enjoyed watching it. It was a good episode, and it had some really, really good acting in it, but the villain was completely throwaway. The elements involving the other characters, with the exception of Ryan and Graham, it was kind of pointless. It just felt more like something where the Doctor and the gang were sort of thrown into it. I was hoping it could be more like, say, Unicorn and the Wasp or Vincent and the Doctor, where they take people who have gone through very serious things in their life and they put something that's a bit more sci-fi in there. And I get that with the Rosa Parks story that would be difficult because it's so recent and it's still touching on something that is very sensitive to a lot of people. But if they weren't going to do that, I thought something else that they could have done that was quite interesting was, and this will be a bit of a spoiler here, so if you don't want to know how the episode goes, skip ahead to this part that I'm going to put up here in post. that I feel like when Rosa was designed to try and miss her spot on the bus, or the driver of the bus wasn't going to make it, that instead Ryan should have been the one to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to move, because in a way that shows that what Rosa did was something that anybody could have done, and that anybody can make a change for the whole world if they're willing to make a stand. I thought that could have been so much more powerful, but the episode itself was meant to be a big tribute to Rosa Parks, so I guess that wouldn't have worked in that regard. But yeah, good episode, but it felt like it wasn't actually a Doctor Who episode in my mind. Then there was Arachnids in the UK, and sadly this is where my biggest problem with Jodie Whittaker's Doctor started to show its head. Now, as I said in the previous vlog, I really like Jodie Whittaker. She has been a very, very good Doctor. I've really, really enjoyed her. Her performance is amazing. She definitely feels like someone who is the Doctor. To me, it's not like previous people who have played the Doctor where it takes a while for you to accept that they are the Doctor. For her, I just accepted it the moment she started saying, I am the Doctor. However, a big problem with the way that she's written, particularly in the episodes that Chibnall writes, is that she feels very much like the 10th Doctor, David Tennant. And I initially got this from one of my favourite former reviewers, who's also a big Doctor Who fan, Welshie, who said on his Twitter that he felt as if they were writing Whittaker as if she was the 10th Doctor. At first I didn't quite agree, but the more I watched it, the more I can kind of see what he's talking about, and yeah, it'd be hard to deny if I can't quite see it myself. Her performance is not like Tennant at all. Her performance is fantastic, but unfortunately the script she's given does kind of feel as if Chibnall doesn't quite know how to write a Doctor that he has created himself, and he's just kind of resorting back to old techniques he's used for previous Doctors. So hopefully that will eventually move on as future series continue, although I have heard rumours that both Whittaker and Chibnall are going to be removed after this series is over. I hope that's just a rumour, because even though I haven't felt this is my all-time favourite series, I'm excited to see more of how it develops and gets better as it goes along. So yeah, hopefully that will improve over time. But as for the episode itself, it was alright. I mean, it was good to have an episode that was set on Earth in the modern day. We haven't had that many of those in this series in particular, so it was good to have that, although the obvious Donald Trump analogue was really, really starting to get annoying pretty quickly, actually. And also I felt really disappointed that they didn't put in a reference to Metebelis 3, which is something from an episode of which the 3rd Doctor regenerated. And I know that they're trying to do their own continuity sort of thing, but it just would have been so easy just to put in one line of dialogue to say, I've been to a planet with giant spiders before, thank God they don't have telepathy this time. That's all you needed. It would have been simple, it wouldn't have distracted from anything, and it would have just kind of fed continuity whores like myself. But that's more of a nitpick if anything else. It was an okay episode, but I felt that it could have been a lot better, and a lot scarier for that matter. Then there was the Saranga Conundrum, or the Tasanga Conundrum, I can't remember how it's pronounced, and this was definitely the worst episode in the run for me. It was dull, boring, it was really hard to follow, and the villain, well, sort of the villain, the monster, just looks way too cute. I'm sorry, but I couldn't help but laugh every time it was on screen. It looked a lot like, and reminded me a lot of Stitch from Lilo and Stitch, and sadly, that's all I'm going to see every time I rewatch this episode. Definitely the lowest point in the series for me. There were some elements in there that were actually kind of okay. The idea of the pregnant man was actually quite interesting, and it led to some really great moments to help show off the acting ability of Mandip Gill and Bradley Walsh, and they have become favourites in my eyes. I've really learnt to kind of love them, particularly Bradley Walsh's character, who, I'll be honest, is my favourite part of this series. There are many moments where he outshines Jodie Whittaker, and not to say Whittaker's bad, of course she isn't, she was fantastic, but Bradley Walsh, man, he just blew her out of the water. Definitely one of my all-time favourite companions, if not my all-time favourite companion thus far, which is impressive for someone who's only had one series so far, so congratulations Bradley Walsh, you really should take a bow after this series. You are the star, my friend. But yeah, this episode definitely the lowest point in the series, but It's not the worst episode of Doctor Who ever, not by a long shot. Then there was The Demons of Punjab, which is where it started going back up again, which was a very good episode, and it helped give us more backstory into Yasmin, although future episodes beyond this gave her a bit more lip service as to the kind of character she is. This is more sort of going into her family backstory, but it was still a good episode in that regard, and it was very good, very, very emotional. The kind of twist around the villains, which again I won't spoil, but the kind of twist around them, it was a bit, I don't know, nonchalant, and it felt a little bit, I wouldn't say predictable, but it was just kind of meh. But the drama between the two major human characters and the other villain that is revealed throughout the episode was very good. And it was also interesting because this is sort of addressing a point of history that I myself am not very familiar with. The partition of India was not something I was taught about that much in school, and I did history all the way through to sixth form. So it was very interesting to learn something about this era of history that I wasn't very familiar with. Then there was Kablam, which is probably my favourite episode of the run so far. It was very fun, very funny, had that very kind of quirky 80s Doctor Who vibe, particularly a Sylvester McCoy episode. This very much reminded me of an episode that you would see McCoy in. Really fun, and it really did feel like they were just really enjoying themselves with this kind of premise, so definitely enjoyed that one. That's probably the one I recommend the most if you just want to watch one episode of this series. Then there was the episode Witchfinders, which was also a very good episode, even though the villains weren't that interesting. The concept was a bit interesting, but when they were actually revealed, they were quite boring. The reason to watch this episode is purely because of Alan Cummings. He is a delight to watch in this episode. He completely hams it up like he usually does. And even though he's missing the Scottish accent, because he's meant to be playing King James I, who was Scottish, and Alan Cummings himself is Scottish as well, it does kind of confuse me that he doesn't have the accent, but he still does a good job, and he's so much fun to watch. So just watch the episode for him. Trust me, you will not regret it. Then there's It Takes You Away, and man, was this a weird one, but in kind of a good way. It had sort of the feel of a almost like Doctor Who meets Coraline kind of thing, and it kind of worked, and there are some very more cerebral episodes of Doctor Who, particularly during, say, the first, second and fifth Doctors and sixth Doctor, particularly Trial of the Time Lord, that I think this kind of fits into, and it really works. And the bits near the end, which again I won't spoil, but it just, I can't even it's hard to even describe what happened near the end of the episode, but it's one of those moments where you just look at it and you think, man, I love Doctor Who. And now finally we have tonight's episode, the Battle of Planet I can't pronounce the name of, so here it is. Oh, I have to admit this is probably one of my least favourite series finale episodes, mostly in the fact that it doesn't feel like a series finale. It feels more like just any generic episode of the series that could have really gone anywhere, and I don't know, it just, I didn't really grab me that much. And even as a standalone episode I didn't really enjoy it that much. It kind of felt to me like Doctor Who meets The Last Airbender with a little bit of Star Wars in there, which sounds awesome, but unfortunately the mix wasn't very good. And like I said, there are some parts with Graham's character that are thrown in here, which I won't spoil, but they feel a bit out of character for him. I mean, regardless of where this episode was placed in the run, it doesn't feel like something he would do. It almost feels like his and Ryan's characters suddenly switched personalities just for this one episode, but I don't know. That's just my opinion, and it does seem as if Chibnall was trying to make this less of a traditional kind of like final climax and make it more as if it was just sort of like a less serialized story. It was more just sort of, here's an episode, here's an episode, here's an episode, the end. And I guess if that's kind of your thing, then that's fine, but I do prefer the sort of ongoing stories that Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat introduced in their series. But this is sort of a thing that I'll probably just have to get used to, because Chibnall is much different from the writers that we've had beforehand. So yeah, not one of my favourite episodes of the series, but that's just really me, to be honest. In terms of like an actual episode, I can definitely see it being entertaining to a lot of people, so it's probably just my preference here. And that's it for Doctor Who Series 11. Definitely not one of my favourite series. There's definitely some work to be done with Chris Chibnall's handling of the show, so I'm looking forward to how this develops as it goes along, and definitely has some of my favourite new characters in Doctor Who in it, and some of my least favourite, but you know, you win some, you lose some. But yeah, so far I have been enjoying this series, and it's had its ups and its downs, but that comes hand in hand with any Doctor Who series, so definitely looking forward to the future series and the New Year's special, though admittedly I'm not holding my breath on the idea of the villain of it being a returning villain, because they haven't done that the entire series. But that's just the way Chibnall wants to play it, and even though I don't agree with it, that doesn't mean it's bad, it's just the way he wants to do it. But yeah, so far I've enjoyed it, and I hope you did too, and stay tuned because my next proper review is coming very soon. Bye!